Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to everybody. Children's Services Committee meeting tonight. Welcome to Hampshire, and we are also welcoming Tim Sandel, who is standing instead of Eric Benson. Paul Brading will be joining us a little bit later. Right, just an adjustment to my set by one of our officers. We will start the meeting. Please make sure that your mobile phones are either on mute or turned off. And we've had no apologies at the moment, apart from Rob Saunders, who is attending the Southampton meeting. We have a slight technical problem. Is there somebody, please, who is not muted, because we're getting feedback across the system? Right, I will carry on. Welcome, as I said, to everybody, and especially to Tim Sandel, who is standing in for Derek Benson. And apologies we've had from Rob Saunders. Otherwise, I believe all are present and correct. I would like to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of September. Are there any comments or queries, please, on those minutes?
I'll move, Chairman.
Yes, Councillor Cameron.
I'll move them for approval, if that's okay. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Seconded.
Right, thank you. I will duly sign them. We will now move on to declarations of interest, please.
Any member of interest?
There are none. And public question time.
None received, Chairman.
None received. We will now go on to item 4, Children's Social Care Annual Complaints Report.
Chair, if I may, if I introduce the item, then I'll hand over to Karina Large, who is with us. I can see on the list, and we'll walk you through. Oh no, hang on, I've got 2 KLs. Yes, I've got Karina Large, who will walk you through the report. Just by way of a brief introduction, it is a requirement for us to produce an annual report on complaints to children around children's social care. It takes a bit of collating, and we've got out a sequence in terms of our reporting to the committee. So this is the 2018-19 report, which is running late. I mean, it's not running late for us, but it's run late in terms of us getting it to this committee. We're nearly finished on the 2020 report, so we'll try and catch up ourselves over the next year or so in terms of the scheduling of it. That's down to us, I think. But generally, Karina will now run you through the highlights of the report. It is, I'm afraid, it's a lengthy report. It's structured in the way it's structured because that's the requirement of it, if you see what I mean. We have to write it in a certain way to answer certain questions, which makes it perhaps a less than easy read. But even so, there's lots of useful information tucked away in it. So Karina, can I hand over to you to just walk members through the report, please?
Thank you, Steve. I think it'd be useful if I start with the briefing note, because that has the key issues in it. So if you just bear with me, and I will attempt to share my screen. There we go. So as Steve explained, it is a requirement in terms of the statutory complaints that a complaint report is produced, and these are the key findings from the 1819 report. So in relation to the children's social care representations received for the Isle of Wight Council Children's Services, there were 39 representations in the reporting period. That is a decrease in this particular period. I don't think that we couldn't see any particular reason for that. And we don't know whether that trend will continue, but in relation to complaints, sometimes an increase isn't a negative indication, no more than a decrease is a positive one. It really does depend on you know, how many people choose to complain in that period, and often of more interest is the idea about what is actually complaints about. The 90% of the statutory stage 1 complaints were responded to within the statutory timescale. Now, the preferred timescale, the one laid out in the statutory guidance, is that complaints are responded to at stage 1 within 10 working days, but there is the opportunity, if the complaint is complex, or sometimes, as we find that key members of staff are on annual leave and are not available to be involved in the investigation and the response within the 10 days, then an extension to 20-day maximum is permitted. And you'll see that 90% of stage 1 complaints were responded to within that statutory maximum. And that has been something that we've seen an improvement with in relation to responses for complaints over the time that we've been involved in social care complaints for the Isle of Wight. So that is a positive thing. The average there is 14.1 days, but I would suggest that in when you're looking at a small cohort of complaints, actually, whilst we wouldn't want any kind of overdueness with complaints, actually, if you look at the actual number of complaints, that was only 2 complaints went over the timescale, as opposed to 3 in the previous reporting period. The most frequent nature of complaints related, not surprisingly, to the quality of service and the conduct of staff and non-fulfilment of duty. So those kind of practical concerns that people have in terms of, you know, the communication and how staff they feel have responded to them. Interestingly, we are in the process, we've just configured and set up a new database, and we're actually looking at some different categories in terms of looking at the nature, so that maybe it provides a bit more of an explicit explanation of what people complain about, because obviously if you take something like quality of service, that's quite a broad brushstroke, but generally speaking, the concerns that people raise related to their interaction with our staff, as opposed to the application of a policy or in terms of something more formal. It's about that human interaction that, maybe not surprisingly, generates complaints in an atmosphere where emotions, particularly for families and for parents, are running high, and you know, the opportunity, if you like, for misinterpretation is probably quite high as well. In the reporting period, 2 of the complaints progressed to statutory stage 2, and both of those then went on to the 3rd and final process. So the social care complaint process is a three-stage process. Most complaints, if not resolved before they become a formal complaint, are then resolved or go no further than the stage 1 process. But in this reporting period, 2 were escalated to stage 2, and then, because the complainant still remained dissatisfied, they progress to the 3rd stage of the process. Complainants can, at the completion of the council's complaints process, so at the end of stage 3, they can take their complaint to the local government and social care ombudsman. They're also at liberty to do that at any point in the process, although the ombudsman may well refer them back to complete the local authority's complaints process. And then, in terms of, again, the highlights, most representations tend to be from parents. The majority of the complaints were from parents. I believe the next significant group were young people and also grandparents. And in relation to grandparents, we are seeing a continuing trend of an increase in complaints made by grandparents, sometimes in their own right, sometimes on behalf of their children, so the parents, and sometimes on behalf of their grandchildren. So in relation to, those are the key findings, if you like, the keynotes from the report. In terms of, if there are any questions relating to that, or any other questions from, I understand that you've obviously had the full report, but in terms of, those are the sort of edited highlights.
Thank you very much for that. My members of the committee obviously have the report, probably like me, next to them. So I would like to ask the members of the committee, do they wish to either question or have clarification on any of the points raised?
Yes, please.
That's Councillor Fuller.
Right, I'm just trying to get the camera on. Right, thank you. I hope you can see me. The complaints that we've had, you mentioned that 2 of the complaints went to stage 2,
Yes,
and then on to stage 3.
yeah.
Now, after they got to stage 3, did they get resolved, or was it, or you know, what I really want to get from this is whether the people that are complaining, what are these complaints referring to? How are they being dealt with? And what are the positive outcomes that are arisen from the end? Again, we're being told here more about the process than what is actually at the coalface. And I want to know a little bit more about satisfying those people that have the initial complaints and making sure that their complaints feel as though they've been dealt with properly. It's a bit of a concern that we have a stage 2, and both of the people were not satisfied by the work that happened in stage 2 and then went to stage 3. And I'd really like to know a little bit more about how those complaints were dealt with, and were there a positive outcome when it came to following those complaints?
Chair.
Just before we go any further, Councillor Fuller, we have to be very careful we do not identify in any form involved. But Steve Crocker would like to come in.
Yeah, well, I think that's an absolutely correct point there, Chair, and that is the tricky bit about this report, actually, and it's particularly tricky when actually there are relatively low numbers here. When you think about Hampshire, we're dealing with a much bigger number, and what I would say, number one, is the Isle of Wight is roughly in proportion as I perceive it, because I see obviously the Hampshire comparison. So the second thing, and to Councillor Fuller's point, and it's a completely legitimate point, but it's really difficult to answer, is that we're dealing with the full range of human experience. The basic premise that I say to staff is that we will not get it right every time. So if we've got it wrong, and you know we've got it wrong, just say, I'm sorry, we've got that wrong, and try and put it right. And actually those are the ones that tend to get resolved, generally speaking, at stage one, where we've just got it right, and we just got it wrong rather, and we put something right. There is the other side of that though, and without being prejudicial, we do get complaints which are really quite complex, and sometimes we don't actually agree that we've got it wrong. We think that we've got it right, but the complainant doesn't accept that we've got it right. And typically those are the ones that tend to run to stage 2 to stage 3 of the local government ombudsman. And I think it's absolutely right. And what generally is the case is that somewhere in that real complexity, the complainant has a point, and we try to learn about the point, try and take the point. But some of the other points they make might often not be correct, or they're too emotionally involved sometimes to sort of detach from it. So it's really difficult to generalize, I know, but I think that it is, I don't necessarily think it's unhealthy that you have the majority resolved at stage 1, some go to stage 2 and some go to stage 3. It's almost like a filtering process, and that probably indicates a system that's functioning and healthy. And I know about those stage 3 ones, and I don't think they're probably ever gonna not go to stage 3, if the truth be told, on those particular ones. So but I probably can't give you much more detail on that, because then we swerve into the individual issues that were in those complaints. And I think Karina wants to come in and supplement that if she can, Chair.
Yes, Karina, if you would like to speak.
Thank you. Thank you. Two things I'd like to say. In terms of the reporting period that we're looking at, three complaints went to the LGSCO as full complaints, and none of the 3 of them were upheld. So in terms of going through the process, the LGO didn't agree that there was fault. And just to reinforce the fact that actually often complaints progress because there is a difference in perception from the department and from the complainant, and often they are very emotive. But in my experience, both Hampshire and the Isle of Wight are very proactive, and if there is a fault, then actually that is resolved very quickly. You know, if there's a clear and obvious fault, it's resolved very quickly. And in fact, I can only offer this anecdotally, but my experience as complaints manager is that sometimes things go wrong and they're resolved even before they become complaints. So when there is a substantive issue and a clear error, then actually the local authority is good at identifying that and going, yeah, we've made a mistake, we can do this to remedy it. So it is quite complex. The ones that progress are not always the complaints where resolution is possible, and therefore it's good to have that process, because at the end of that process, or at some point in between, the local government ombudsman gets involved and gives maybe a more independent, dispassionate view on the complaint. So I hope that helps.
Thank you very much, Karina. I think it's worthwhile thinking that we're talking about children are very, very precious, and they're very, very precious to their children, to their parents. And I think that
absolutely,
a lot of the time, you cannot do enough for your children. And I really appreciate the tact which both you and Steve have addressed this, and I fully understand now, and I appreciate the responses that I've had. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Chair, you muted then. We didn't hear what you said.
Sorry, Councillor Downer would like to ask a question.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just referring to page 29, recommendation 7, it says here, future annual complaint reports have to be more specific info on service requirements that result from complaints. Will that be reflected in the next report, and how's that been dealt with? Thank you.
Would you like me to respond?
Oh, yes, please. Yeah.
Please, Karina. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. We have got a new database. We have invested quite a lot of time in configuring that database, so it shows the reports we can pull off of it are more detailed. So as I was saying about the nature of complaints, quality of service is quite helpful, but it's not as helpful as being much more specific about the reasons, you know, the reasons for complaints. So in the next annual report, you should expect to see more detail about whether a complaint is upheld or not upheld, so a breakdown of actually how that complaint has been responded to, and identification of elements in terms of particularly around learning and integrating learning from complaints into everyday practice.
And if I could just come in, it's really important for me, Councillor Downer, as the sort of overall leader of the service, that I've got a really specific understanding of what people are not happy about. So if I get I don't know, 5 complaints about connected carer assessments, a bit you know, niche as it were, but that would indicate to me that something in that little corner of the service is not quite right. And whereas if I've got 5 complaints that are spread across different bits of things, and I've not, it doesn't look to me like I've got a practice issue. It is more spread out, you know, amongst different teams. So that level of granularity, which we've been seeking for a while, is really, really important, and we're looking forward to the next report, which does give us exactly that information.
Thank you very much, Steve, and apologies for butting in just now. Thank
you.
Worries.
No worries.
Thank you, Chairman.
In the chat bar, Sean, who's a parent governor, can't seem to get his laptop to work correctly, and he has a query. It's on page 49. No,
page 16.
Yes, it's page 16, going across to page 17. He's querying the number 49 total representation complaints, a raw number, or has this been filtered down from a greater number? If you look at page, as I said, it's actually at the top of page 17, 4.44.
4.44. I'm going to ask Karina, because she will have done the data.
Right.
Karina, can you help on that one?
I'm struggling to actually find that bit in the report, and I will look for it in a minute, but my understanding is it's not been filtered data. That would be the number of representations that we've received, but I'll try and pull up the report. Sorry, are you able to give me the page 16, wasn't
that? Yes.
Two
yes,
questions.
Page 16.
I think he's got 2 questions.
And it goes across, though, onto page 17, which says 71% of statutory stage 1 complaints, etc.
I'm afraid my SharePoint has
you've got different page numberings as well. I because this is a pack. I think it's section 4.44, isn't it? If you pull that up, Karina.
Yes, Karina, that's page 17 on the original document.
Thank you. 4.4.
So it reads 71% of statutory stage 1 complaints were responded to within the upper time limit.
Yeah.
Outside of the standard deadline of 10 working days.
Yeah.
This is permissible within the guidance. So it's important that the 10-day extension is viewed as an exception rather than standard practice. So the question was, is that correct, Chair? Have I got? Am I looking at the right?
From what I can make out, Paul is just
That's
handing
all
me
right. That's
something.
George
Oh,
Cameron
sorry.
wants to
Yeah,
speak,
right.
yeah. The questions are actually in the chat bar, Chairman.
The question is actually in the chat bar. Can you bring up the chat bar, Karina?
I will do my best.
There's in fact 2 questions from Sean Arnold, Chairman.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Page 16, 4.4. He says performance on stage 1 numbers are less, completion performance is less. Why? I'm not quite sure I understand.
I think if we can deal with that outside the meeting, I think that would be better.
I think yes, because otherwise we're going to waste too much time on this. Sean, I promise you that this will be dealt with and Karina will be able to look at this at a later date. Thank you. I have a question from Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 21, it's about the service complaints 4.8. I see the disabled children's team receive a lot of complaints, almost half. It's going towards half of the total amount of complaints. It is explained below what the issue is. I just want to find out, is that very consistent normally, or is there something we can change to lower that? Or is that just parents feel the criteria is not set at the right level?
Yeah, it is. The reason behind that, I think, is that we, like all services, we have to have a threshold. For all disabled children's services, we have a threshold above which you have to get in order to access services. And generally, that is an area where you get more complaints than not, because people feel that they have got over the threshold, and our judgment is that they haven't, and there's then a dispute about it, and that's familiar territory. It's unfortunately it's an area that yeah, we would like to give services to many more children, I'm sure, that, you know, but the reality is that we have to draw a line somewhere, and wherever you draw the line, people will be unhappy because they feel that they would like to get over it.
Thanks. Does a supplementary on do parents readdress the issue? Do you get vexatious complaints? Does it turn into something similar?
We get, yeah, like everywhere, we get some vexatious complaints, not many. I try to, yeah, not very many. The ones we do get can take up a lot of time, but most people, I think it's important to have a complaints process. We need to understand if people are not happy. We can't always make them happy. We can't always take a different decision. But at least, you know, we need to know and we need to understand that. We need people to be able to express that. And it's important that our staff are responsive to that and understand why people might be unhappy. And in that context, you know, we actually get pretty few, yeah, maybe 1 or 2 a year, something like that.
That's great, lovely. Thanks, Steve. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. Are there any more questions, or may we take the report as it is and move on to the next item, unless anybody else has anything they wish to add?
Carla?
Yeah. Councillor Love.
Thank you, Chair. I just it's just so difficult to talk about this report when it refers to 2018-19. I was wondering if we could try and push the other forward rather than waiting a year. I know you've already suggested that we can get that onto the agenda fairly quickly so that we can have a look at that as soon as it's finished, but if that's possible, even if it's just a draft, so that we can, because there doesn't seem to be much point in asking lots of questions about this because it's now so old. But I do agree that it's important to understand what the actual issues are. If we understand that there's, as you've already highlighted, that if there's a number of complaints in a particular area, then we can at least focus in, because that tells us where we need to spend our time looking. So thank you, Chair.
Do you wish to answer that?
Only subject to your approval, Chair. I mean, I'm more than happy to try and get the next round back to you more quickly. I know Karina's working hard to finalise the 2020 report, so hopefully we can get that with you much sooner than this one. Subject to the pressures on the diary of this committee, of course, which is the other dimension to it.
Yes. Right, thank you very much for that, and that has been noted. Now, after that, we will now go to number 5, Safeguarding Children's Board Annual Report. And as I explained right at the beginning, Tim Sandel will be presenting this. So over to you, Tim.
If I can, if you wouldn't mind, Tim, if I would just introduce it, because it usually helps to give a bit of context. And I know members of the committee now are pretty seasoned on this committee, but I just want to remind people that this is the partnership report. So this is our work with the police, with the NHS, and with lots of other partners. It is not technically the Children's Social Care report, and the emphasis is on the partnership approach and how the partners have done. The board is independent of the council, chaired by an independent person, Derek Benson, and Tim's is the board manager, who's on our books but effectively reports to Derek Benson, the independent person. So Tim's also in a slightly difficult position of having relatively recently come into the job. He didn't write the report, but he's going to talk about it. So that's always a tricky one to do, but I know you can do that really well, Tim. So over to you.
Thank you, Steve.
Right. Thank you for that, Steve. And over to you, Tim.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to summarise the annual report and just make it clear that the reporting period is from March 2019, April 2019 to March 2020. So the annual report provides an assessment of the effectiveness of agencies across the Isle of Wight to safeguard and promote the welfare of children. This report highlights that safeguarding arrangements on the island have continued to improve. There is positive progress in many areas of child protection, with strong and integrated frontline services maintained in conjunction with Children's Services Partnership with Hampshire. The Isle of Wight Safeguarding Children's Partnership have ensured the implementation of arrangements, these are the new arrangements set out in Working Together 2018. So the relevant information, the business plan in the report outlines 3 strategic priorities: to further embed and evaluate Isle of Wight Safeguarding Children's Partnership initiatives, to strengthen assurance programmes, leadership and transformation, and this was required to ensure a smooth transition to the new safeguarding arrangements on the Isle of Wight outlined in Working Together 2018. So that was as from a board to a partnership, which is what we currently are. There are key themes running through the 3 priority areas: the voice and lived experience of the child, multi-agency partnership working, and lessons are identified and learned from case reviews and multi-agency audits. I just want to talk about the progress made on the 2019 to 2020 business plan priorities. Priority 1 was further embed and evaluate Isle of Wight Safeguarding Children's Partnership initiatives. The Isle of Wight Safeguarding Children's Partnership continues to deliver its agreed programme of initiatives to safeguard and promote the safety and welfare of Isle of Wight children and their families. Priority 2 was strengthening our assurance programmes, and the Isle of Wight Safeguarding Children's Partnership is assured that the services provided to children and their families on the Isle of Wight are timely, appropriate and effective. Agency responses to the Section 11 audit and their action plans and visits to agencies evidence progress in regard to children's workforce understanding and awareness of policies and required practice. Chairs of subgroups monitor and progress on their work plans at quarterly meetings and through the action trackers held for all subgroups. Progress is reported to the business group. The Isle of Wight Safeguarding Children's Partnership will continue to lead and safeguard the safeguarding agenda and challenge the work of partner organisations. The updated local safeguarding arrangements are due to be published with the implementation completed in line with Working Together 2018 statutory guidance. The Isle of Wight Safeguarding Children's Partnership published the new Child Death Overview Panel arrangements with implementation which is in place in line with Working Together 2018 statutory guidance. In partnership with Hampshire, Portsmouth, Southampton, the Isle of Wight Safeguarding Children's Partnership developed and implemented the new Pan-Hampshire exploitation and health work streams. I just want to talk about now our key successes to date. The Isle of Wight Safeguarding Children's Partnership with local Safeguarding Hampshire, Portsmouth, Southampton partnerships launched the Family Approach, Protocol and Toolkit. 6 multi-agency workshops were held across the Isle of Wight to introduce the protocol and toolkit in 2019 and 2020. The Isle of Wight Safeguarding Children's Partnership with local Safeguarding Hampshire, Portsmouth, Southampton partnerships set up the ICON project in order to reduce abusive head trauma in babies, and the project is now a national project. The Isle of Wight Safeguarding Children's Partnership supported the development and launch of Every Sleep Counts campaign at the Isle of Wight, Portsmouth, Southampton and Safeguarding Partnerships event with practical sessions at venues across the island. Current work in progress. The evaluation of ICON and Every Sleep Counts campaigns will be undertaken in 2021. The Isle of Wight Safeguarding Children's Partnership in collaboration with Hampshire, Portsmouth, Southampton local safeguarding partnerships is supporting the Lurking Trolls online safety campaign. The Lurking Trolls campaign and materials will be launched and rolled out to schools in 2021. And the revised neglect strategy and toolkit is also due to be launched in February 2021. I'd just like to conclude with that the annual report provides evidence that safeguarding remains a firm priority for all partner agencies across the Isle of Wight. This is demonstrated by consistently good levels of attendance and effective engagement in subgroups and a strong culture of constructive challenge and debate. Multi-agency work within the partnership groups and subgroups promotes work to drive a range of improvements for both the safety and welfare of children and young people. Partnership membership extends across several working groups to provide continuity. Key to our success has been a focus on the different safeguarding contexts that exist across the island, with emphasis being placed on children and young people being safeguarded in their homes, in their friendship circles, in health, in education and in the public spaces that they occupy, both offline and online. And that concludes my summary, Chairman. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Tim. Right, do we have questions, please, from
Councillor Love?
Councillor Love.
Am I there? Yep. Thank you for your report. Very much appreciate that. I know it's difficult talking to a report which you haven't actually directly raised, and so you might not be able to answer some of the questions. Again, I just highlight again that you know the report was March and we're now in December, and so I wonder whether if it might be able to in future get it onto an earlier agenda, if at all possible, Chair, in the future. Simply because if there are any issues that are identified, I think it's important that we get on top of them as quickly as possible. So, so a couple of questions. I'm just trying to understand what this is about. So,
sorry,
so,
can I just come back in on that one?
Yeah.
Which is, I'm not sure. The report relies on a lot of data, and that takes a while to get through to be analysed and so forth. I don't think we published this. What, in the last month or so have we published this, Tim?
Yeah, it was in September. I'll just like to say, Councillor Love, that reporting timeline is comes under working together. So we're required to report and publish by September. So as you said, Steve, sorry, it was published in the last month.
So theoretically we could aim for the autumn, but we couldn't get it before September. So that's the answer.
And thank you, Chair, for thank you for the clarity on that. I was just presuming that it was printed in March, so apologies there. Just so my questions are then. So I want to just have a look, just dig down into the evaluation tool, please. So this is the evaluation highlights from the strategy tool. I just want to understand here. So it says half have accessed the resource available in the toolkit. So this is half of the practitioners. So firstly, and it says that 3/4. Sorry, I'm just trying to read what I've written here now. Sorry.
Could you please quote a page number, Carl?
Yes, so it's 15 or 51. And I'm looking at the paragraph points there. So half have had access, over half had accessed the resource available in the toolkit. So what does that half mean? How many staff are we talking about there in terms of using the toolkit? And then it says only a third. My apologies, I'm getting a little bit lost with what I've actually written here. What I'm trying to get down to is that the staff don't all seem to have access to the toolkit. So I'm trying to understand what progress we're making with that, because I would expect if we've got a toolkit there for just about everybody to be accessing that toolkit. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And that just probably needs a little bit more explanation, because it's obviously not going to be as straightforward as what I'm thinking.
Right. I think if we can bring Kathy Marriott here, please.
Hi there, thank you. Carl, I believe you're referring to the neglect strategy and
I am,
toolkit.
yes.
So as I took a bit of a lead on that, I'm probably best placed to respond rather than Tim trying to find that response. So we launched a neglect strategy over 4 years ago now, actually, and we have been delivering that across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight over the last 4 years. And as part of our evaluation of our training and use of resources, we undertook a survey across partner agencies. So it's only ever going to be a snapshot, and it was it was quite a comprehensive survey. I haven't got the data to hand in terms of the number of people who completed it. However, one of the things that did come up through that survey was that not everybody had accessed the toolkit to use in their practice. So hence we are revising our strategy. We have really built upon the toolkit that is available on the Safeguarding Partnerships website, and we are adding more resources to it, and that's all guided by the feedback that we have. But I would highlight that we had over 17,000 hits on that particular part of the local Safeguarding Partnerships website, and the feedback that we have of people who have used the toolkit is that it has really improved their practice in A, identifying neglect, but B, also putting in the appropriate interventions to support children and families who find themselves in that situation. So it is a snapshot, and what we, as Tim has referred to, we have revised that neglect strategy, ready for a relaunch in the new year, and that includes a kind of a refresh of all that work based on the feedback that we've had.
The other thing I'd add to that is have a look at it. It's in the links in the report. I think it's really good. It's really good stuff. But the other thing is, don't forget, this is not just Isle of Wight Council staff. This is this NHS and police. And the other thing is is that you need it when you need it, but you might not actually go and look it out when you don't need it, because and there's a sort of logic in that, really.
So thank you for that, Chair. Thank you. I thank you for the explanation. That makes sense. So
Right, thank you. I now have Councillor Downer.
Thank you, Chairman. A question about lessons learned, please, if I may. Once you've started looking at cases and looking at lessons that can be learnt from those cases, how long is the process before your actual conclusions are put into operation? Thank you.
Who would like to reply to that, please?
Does that make sense?
The cases go for a review process, councillor, and it's a difficult one to quantify because that can depend on how complex the case is, what the process is that we're going through, what those lessons are, and how we disseminate that to staff. So is that through training? Is that through a report? So it's I'm afraid there's no one answer to that.
No. But perhaps I was being oversimplistic. But is it possible for a supplementary, please, Chairman?
Yes, carry on, Councillor Downer.
Oh, thank you. Is on page 36, it's got about CAMS. Now, how has the CAMS performance improved from the last report? Thank you.
I think I'll try and help out a bit here. The report doesn't comment on all aspects of an organisation's performance. Right. So it only comments on organisations vis-a-vis their safeguarding responsibilities. So doesn't really comment on, for example, CAMS waiting lists, which we know have been an issue around autism, although we also know that they're much better than they used to be. Yeah. But it does comment, or it alludes to responsibilities around safeguarding. And we know that NHS on the Isle of Wight has faced numerous challenges in the last few years, but also we know that those are, and we've got evidence from external reports. So, for example, from the CQC, that those issues are improving. So we can rely on those reports. I think. I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add to that, Tim.
Yeah, just to say, councillor, that I can we get regular assurance from our health colleagues in the subgroups that we have, and so I know that there's a lot of work being undertaken in terms of promoting the CAMS service. We have a 0 to 19 subgroup at the moment where a lot of that work's going on.
Thank you very much.
Right, I have a question from Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Chairman. What I wanted to do was ask a question again. It's not really. It's just an issue that I've seen quite a lot of in the last couple of years, and it's young carers. Yeah. And sometimes you have young people that are caring for adults, and more so as adults are getting older, and I'm just wondering what support mechanism is there for young carers. The other thing I wanted to ask as well was, with the lockdowns that we've had, how has the lockdowns impacted adversely, has it impacted adversely on a lot of the group sessions that you do? Because again, particularly with young offenders, those group sessions are so important, and it's important for parents to interact with other parents that are in exactly the same position as they feel that they are. And by doing everything virtually now, is that as effective to resolve those issues as it previously was? And is there an opportunity maybe in the future that we may see things coming up where both the parents and the children aren't being supported because of COVID-19? I know that this is a report pre-COVID-19, but I'm looking more towards the future and to develop on mechanisms that currently in place, because we're now in a totally different world than we were when this report was written.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
If I can start, Chair.
Steve, are you going to answer this?
Yeah, if I can start, I think Kathy is looking like she wants to come in as well on this one. And you're winning the prize for the best questions tonight, Councillor Fuller, because they're bang on. This one's, it's really, so firstly on the group thing, yes is the answer, that it's not, well, yes, it's not as effective. And we tried in, I don't know if we tried in the Isle of Wight, but we certainly tried in Hampshire, some group sessions with parents, and with the dynamics not right. So we look forward to getting those people back together and in a room, and yes, we are missing something about that, and I don't think there's any doubt in our minds that some of our work is compromised by not being able to be in the same room as people. And even though we're in tier 1 in the Isle of Wight at the moment, that still is compromised by COVID, and quite rightly too. So we look forward to that point where we can get people back in. Our work will be even more effective, but at the moment we just can't do some of that stuff. The do you want to pick up, Kathy, on that as well? Or
Kathy, do you wish to continue?
Sorry, yes, well, just
Kathy, that is a fantastic backdrop you've got.
Do you recognise it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, just down the road. So just to pick up on the young carers element, that's what I was just going to mention. So we obviously, as part of our statutory responsibilities, if we are aware that there are issues concerning young carers in terms of safeguarding, etc., then our normal social care services and indeed early help services are available for those children. But in addition, we commission currently the YMCA to deliver young carers support across the island, and they're working with around 320 young carers across the island at any one time. And actually we've done a lot of engagement over the COVID period because we really recognised that that was a group that would need additional support. So we've had a real focus on ensuring that those young children are in school where they're able, when and where they were able to be. But we've also linked with a charity called the Getaway Foundation that actually supplied a lot of free bikes to young carers on the island this summer, so that's been really exciting. And actually they are also funding some work over the Christmas period to ensure that those young people have some fun and games and activities over the Christmas period. And I'd also highlight, and we'll be coming on to this later when we talk about COVID response, but they are one of the groups that we have identified in terms of the winter grants from government, that we will be making sure that they get vouchers for food over the Christmas period and over February half term. So they are a group that are very present in our minds.
And the final thing, just to pick up, is that the broad thrust of your question, which was about, if I paraphrase that, is safeguarding more difficult in COVID? The answer is yes, it is, because it's families are more pressurised. We're seeing and we'll come on to some of this later on with Kathy's going to do a presentation about performance, but we're seeing roughly 10 to 15% more work coming through the front door based from this time last year, and that's around, it's difficult to completely evidence it, but from what we see, it's about families really struggling during confinement and being cooped up in lockdowns, and that's having we see more domestic abuse, more substance misuse, that sort of stuff. So that's coming through to us as it's affecting children, and we are busier than we've ever been. So we are, it's a difficult time, but we're well equipped to deal with it, as we'll explain later. But it's not to minimise the difficulties that families are experiencing.
You come back, Councillor Fuller. I do have somebody else waiting, so if you'd be very brief, please.
A very quick supplementary. I just wanted to make sure that there are resources being made available to you guys to make sure that support can function properly. Thank you.
Right. Yes, we've got funding for additional social workers gone into each of our child assessment and safeguarding teams. The funding is there, it's been released. It's slightly trickier actually recruiting at this point in time because people aren't moving around the country for obvious reasons, so that's the recruitment is more tricky than the money, but we have money released.
Thank you. Now,
You're on mute again, Chair. We can't hear you.
right, I have a question from Sean, our parent governor. If my committee members turn to page 60, which is the council's end, which gives the Isle of Wight demographics, because Sean's question is about what is published on page 27 of the report, where he queries that 72% feel safe in school. That means that 28% of the children don't feel safe, which, if that's correct, means that 3,000 children, because that's why I refer you to page 60, that means that 3,000 children do not feel safe, and he is querying this. Is there anybody who can answer this for us, please?
I think that if you get a group of school children in a room and ask them what the biggest issue for them is, almost every time that we do that exercise, what comes out on top is bullying, and that will be why those children do not feel safe in school. And that is, you know, every school has to have an anti-bullying strategy, but that will be what lies at the root of that question. And actually that number doesn't surprise me. In fact, arguably it's rather lower than it is in some places.
In fact, that was Paul Thistlewood and I discussed this, and we came to the same conclusion. It is fear of their peers. The thing is, I know we have anti-bullying campaigns in schools, but is there any more that we can do? Has COVID made it worse? Is there something we can explore more? And I'm not saying we do it here, but is there something that that we can do to provide more information on this?
There's always more that we can do, and there's always more that we want to do on this issue, but it's a huge topic, and it might be one that you might want to bring back for a proper session at committee. You know, off the cuff answers on that one probably aren't going to do it justice, if I'm honest. I think it's a massive issue for children across the country, and no less on the Isle of Wight, and it would be worth spending some time, I think, exploring what we do in schools around bullying and how but so much of that also, and this is why the topic opens out, so much of that is around online bullying. So children who've got devices get the bullying isn't necessarily face-to-face these days. It's often through electronic media and so forth, and social media, and that's why children don't feel safe. You're on mute, sir.
I totally agree with you. Paul Thistlewood has made a note about this, and we will explore it further. So, Sean, I hope you felt reassured by that. Are there any other questions or comments, please, from the rest of the committee?
Yes, please.
Councillor Cameron.
Yeah, just whilst we were talking about the bullying issue, it is very important that this needs to be taken seriously, and also there's a high perception of bullying as well. But I think what we need to do, if I may put a suggestion forward, and I did work on something like this about a year ago, and I could pick it up again as chairman of our council, and that is to arrange an anti-bullying conference between all the schools and for Isle of Wight Council to run with. I think we're well due for one. We have had one before, and it was very effective, and I think it's time we look at another one again.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think the only thing I would say, Chair, is we need to get the schools back operating normally. If we try and do it whilst they're still dealing with COVID, it'll be too much for them, in fairness. But once they're back operating normally, they're not having to self-isolate people, then I think that would be a very good idea to take forward.
Look at that. Yeah, thank you, Steve. Yeah.
Thank you, Steve, for that. In which case we will go on to the next item. We're now talking about the performance and budget update.
Emails on my screen.
Chair, you're sharing your screen at the moment?
Yeah,
I am.
yeah,
I
Sorry.
believe so.
that's it.
Right. So as I said, we go on to the performance and budget update to consider the current performance trends. Who, Steve, will be dealing with this?
Well, again, I'll just introduce it. I mean, Kathy's prepared a presentation for us. This is now a bit of a regular fixture with you, so you should be familiar with what we're going to talk about, and I'll hand over to Kathy to walk us through the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I'm just going to try and share my screen with you. So can you confirm, is that on the screen? Because I've now lost sight of you. Oh.
Yes,
yes, it is, Kathy.
Yeah. Okay, lovely. Right, I shall just rearrange myself so I'm not looking at one monitor and not looking at you. So yes, as Steve has said, this is a regular report now that we bring every 6 months, and I'm just going to take us through kind of the key highlights and then obviously leave an opportunity for questions at the end. So we'll be just revising our service plan, just reminding everybody of what our kind of key priorities are, looking at our performance, our areas for continued improvement, our response. And also, when we met with you, Chair, you said you'd like just to have a quick look at the attendance figures. So I've got those from our Assistant Director, Brian Pope, and also just a quick summary of our finance situation at the moment as well. So just a reminder in terms of our service plan, our key priority areas are to ensure that we're supporting families to help them to look after their own children safely at home and trying to prevent escalation into statutory services, leading the work to keep children safe and protect them from harm and neglect. And also where children cannot stay safely at home, ensuring that we provide permanence through a range of other alternatives. And apologies, but my screen has now got stuck on that page. Let me see if I can move it on. There we go. So how do we deliver that? Well, over the last 18 months, we've been delivering a significant transformation programme, which I'll talk a bit more in detail about in a moment. We are ensuring that children are assessed and receiving appropriate services in a timely manner, ensuring that children receive their services from experienced and qualified staff who have appropriate caseloads, and ensuring that children achieve permanence and experience stability when they are in care, and that's done without undue delay. And one of the things as part of our transformation programme has been looking at where there are opportunities for those children to be reunified with their parents, trying to do that where it is safe for us to do so. We want to ensure that children, parents and carers have every opportunity to fully participate in the way that our services are delivered. And so we are doing a lot of work in terms of co-producing our services with children and families and maintaining our really effective and robust performance management across the service. And one of the really key aspects of that is to be assuring ourselves of the quality of the services that we're delivering to children and families. We obviously always have to do that within the budget that we have set and also within the savings strategy that we have. And so that requires really robust management of our budget as well. So this slide, there's a lot on there and I shall just pick out some key highlights. This is the 4 key areas of our transformation programme, which is really about making our service fit for purpose for the future, and ensuring that we're doing absolutely everything that we can to enable children to live safely at home where they can. So the first part of that is something called the Hampshire and Isle of Wight approach, and that's a strengths-based methodology that runs across all of our services now. It's trauma informed and it's family focused, so working not just with the child but looking across the whole family, and you'll see some data there in terms of the number of staff that have completed the introductory training, the managers training, and we're now in the process of delivering our advanced practice modules. Unfortunately, that was there was a slight hiatus due to COVID, and we've moved all of that training online now so that we can make sure that we're still delivering, because we are still working with families, we are still getting out there and delivering interventions, so it's really important we're doing that in this new approach. We've really built upon our RAFT team, and we've spoken about RAFT here before, our Resilience Around Families team, and that's a multidisciplinary team who are now working with priority cohorts of children recognised as being on the edge of care, so trying to ensure that those children are able to live safely at home. They've supported 249 families since the launch, and of those 39% so far we've completed the intervention, and the long-term outcomes for those children and families have been really positive, with those children being able to stay at home. We've got adult mental health practitioners and children's mental health practitioners in that team, alongside substance misuse workers and targeted family support workers and a PCSO. So that's a really exciting bit of the service where we're seeing really multi-dimensional work happening. We've also got a work stream called Facilitating Effective Social Work, and that's been incredibly handy in terms of our COVID response. It's been about enabling digital technology to be rolled out to all of our staff, so laptops, but also smartphones, so that we have been able to do FaceTime visits with children and families, and support for foster carers via that technology as well. We're in a big process of preparing for a huge data migration onto a new system, and we are also in the process of launching a social worker online toolkit that has all the resources and tools that they need to be working with children and families in the field, and that's just about to be launched in the new year. So huge amount of work over the last 6 to 12 months. And then finally, in terms of our transformation programme, we have procured a new integrated children's system, which is our case management system. We've done that in a joint procurement with Hampshire, and we're on schedule for a rollout in 12 months. But just to raise it, because not underestimating the huge amount of work that not only internally in children's social care, but our IT corporate colleagues are supporting us with in terms of that new system, which is a real fit for purpose for the 21st century system. I'm going to move on to our data now and just talk you through these slides. And we talked about the impact that COVID had in terms of the demand on the service, and I think you can see from the red line there the very steep increase we saw after the initial lockdown in Q1, and the demand that went up in terms of our service, in terms of contacts and referrals into the service in Q2. And as Steve has reflected, that demand has stayed approximately 10 to 15% above what we would be expecting for this time of year. However, what I'm really pleased to say is that our timeliness in terms of ensuring that our assessments and our Section 47s are completed within the appropriate timescales has not been impacted. So we are still in Q2 at 93% of those being completed within timescales, which I think is a huge achievement from the team, who are working in incredibly difficult circumstances, but have absolutely kept a focus on ensuring that we complete those assessments so we can get the right support into the right families in timescales. You'll see here that we have had an increase in terms of the number of children who are open to child protection planning. This slide actually only goes up till Q1. I can tell you that we have continued to see a significant increase in terms of the number of children who are open to child protection planning, and today's figures are that we've have 166 children who are now subject to child protection plans, and I think the service is feeling, having worked really hard at this area for the last 5 years, you know, and got our figures back into line with where we would expect the national average to be. You know, it is a shame to see that increasing. However, that is the picture nationally, and it's entirely appropriate that those cases have been open to child protection. That's the support that those families currently need at this time. We talked earlier about caseloads, and you'll see that we again had a downward trajectory since May 2014, but you'll see obviously that the caseload figures increased over the summer period. What we did very swiftly was identify that actually that wasn't sustainable for our staff. If we're going to deliver good quality social work, then we need to ensure that we've got the capacity to deliver that. And as Steve has said, we have achieved some additional resource to actually recruit some additional social workers into our frontline teams, and we have been successful in some areas. As Steve said, it's very challenging at the moment because every local authority is looking for social workers, and so and people aren't moving around, but we have recruited some. I think we've got 3 additional social workers with another 2 due to start very shortly, and that has had the impact that we wanted on our caseloads. This is just a graph just looking at our rate of child protection plans, and just showing that we were on that downward trajectory. Unfortunately, that has increased slightly in 2020. And similarly, our children in care rate has also increased over this period of time, and I think just to highlight that over this year we've seen a significant increase in the number of police protection orders and emergency protection orders. And what we found during Q1 was there were some families who actually you know, had not been in contact with our services previously, but where parents in the families experienced significant mental health concerns, and we know that that again is a trend across the country, that then necessitated some emergency protection orders and police protection orders happening. So it's something that again we're very mindful of. Our transformation programme is very much about trying to address our children in care rate and enable those children to remain safely at home. And just a reminder really in terms of our age profile of our children in care, and you'll see it's heavily weighted to our adolescents. Many of those have quite complex needs, and we are doing a huge amount of work with our foster carers to ensure that they have the right support so that they're able to maintain those placements on the island for children. And I have to say our stability over the past 2 quarters has been really strong, and that's due to really joined up work between the social care teams and the foster care team in terms of supporting our foster carers in the community so that they're enabled to maintain those placements for those children. In terms of our recruitment and retention, we've been really pleased that we've been able to maintain our vacancy rate at a rate lower than the national average, and also our turnover rate of social workers is lower than the national average as well at 7.1%, and our average for having agency social workers as part of our department is at 12%, and again that is below the national average. Now people will remember a few years ago we were way above the national average in all of those areas, so I think it's a reflection of how the service has come on and developed, that our staff, once they come and work on the island, they are tending to stay on the island, and indeed are actually talking about how good our support and services and management are, and are attracting other workers to the area as well. However, we don't rest on our laurels, and we know that we have still got areas that we really want to strive to improve. And so I've just kind of bullet pointed there the key areas, just making sure that we've got absolute consistency in high quality analysis in our assessments. We want to increase the placement choice for our children, and that includes in terms of recruiting more in-house foster carers. And we've got a big marketing campaign that is happening at the moment. People might have seen things on Facebook. We've been doing online sessions. Just, you know, we're aware a lot of people might be making changes in their life at the moment as a result of the impact of COVID. So really seizing the opportunity to promote foster care on the island. Another area for us is around ensuring that the health of children in care is a top priority, and I'm really pleased to say that even despite COVID, we have managed to maintain a high level of health assessments, both initial and review health assessments for our looked after children, and making sure that we use that health information to ensure those children can access the right level of provision, whether that's through CAMS or other services. A absolute focus for us has been about educational attendance, not just for children in care, but also for children in need and children on child protection plan. And that was a high priority for us, particularly during lockdown. We maintain our focus on recruitment and retention of social workers, as I've just alluded to. And a really key area for us is just making sure that we have significant evidence of our reflective supervision. That's a key support to our social workers. And we know that a lot of that work happens informally, and it's just making sure that we have that recorded and that we can evidence that. People will have seen this slide before, but I've updated it slightly just in terms of our COVID response. And obviously we've just moved into tier 1. So we are keeping abreast of all of the changes. We're making sure that our staff have guidance and support and are very clear about what our expectations are vis-a-vis visiting or meetings with parents, and indeed family time or contact between parents and children. So we've had to keep moving and changing that and making sure that everybody is up to date. We're very much business as usual, so we still must carry out our statutory duties, and on top of that we are trying to develop our transformation programme and all of the statutory elements that we must continue with, and some of the strategic areas that we're developing across not only our service but with partner agencies. We're still having very regular contact with all of our partners, and that's through the local Safeguarding Children's Partnership. And we have an absolute clear focus on work with schools to support the attendance of our most vulnerable children. And that's, you know, we've really increased the joint working. I think one of the good things that came out of COVID is, you know, extra focus on that area and real relationship building with schools to support those children to access their school provision. We're sharing our high risk cases with police, so that we're all making sure that we're focusing on the right cases. We're having weekly meetings with health partners, and we're just making sure that our resources are targeted at the areas where the demand is highest as well. Just another key thing to mention, really, we've made sure that our staff have got the right access to PPE. In terms of Beauty House, they are first in line in terms of making sure we get appropriate testing if any of the staff there are suffering symptoms, etc. And we've made sure that they've got good access to PPE. And then finally, I think there's a real thing about supporting our own staff's social and emotional health. You know, it has been a tough year, and we're acutely aware of that. So making sure that, again, that we've got supervision in place, but also it's been about having some fun opportunities to get together, and our staff really want to have that social connection, that opportunity to kind of have a debrief at the end of the day. So we've really increased the frequency of meetings, and even started doing a few coffee mornings just so people can have an informal get together. And that's a virtual one, I should say. And then in terms of what next for COVID? Well, as we've highlighted, we've got further investment in additional social work capacity, and also in terms of our transformational work, we've identified some further areas that I will update on as we go along, but some further areas where we want to deliver change. And we are obviously planning for our recovery in a phased approach, so looking at how we can start moving staff back into offices when it is safe to do so, and actually looking at some of the lessons learned from because there are some incredibly positive lessons in terms of we can do a lot virtually, and actually that can be a really efficient use of time and resource. So looking at what's appropriate there. And then I just thought I'd mention the Connect for Communities funding. So this is funding that we've had from DWP to support children and families over the winter period. At the beginning of this week, we released funding out to schools for food vouchers for families over the Christmas period. But we're also intending to launch a funding pot for voluntary and community sector organisations to support families over the winter period, and there'll be more media and comms about that over the next couple of weeks. So just to conclude, we're maintaining our management oversight over all of our social care areas. We've had a really robust response in terms of COVID. We're really increasing our focus on the quality of practice, that quality assurance, as well as delivering on our key performance indicators. We are in midway through our transformation programme, I would say, and that's brought about a really significant cultural change in terms of the way that we work with families. We are just in the process of finalising our annual self-evaluation in preparedness for our annual conversation with Ofsted in the next year. That demonstrates that we know ourselves, we know what's working, we know where we need to make improvements, and we know what we're doing about it in terms of what are the next steps to improve. And as I believe the Ofsted window opens back in January, we are always in a readiness state for an inspection. I wouldn't necessarily be hugely surprised if they picked us because we're in tier 1. So I don't know what Steve's thoughts are on that. But we are absolutely, pushing to be, consolidating our good standing, but pushing at being outstanding. And then just as was requested, just a little snapshot, and this was from the week, the 23rd of the 11th, in terms of where we are in relation to attendance. So looking at both primary and secondary, you'll see that we are above the national average for attendance of pupils at school. And that is also the case in terms of our vulnerable cohort. We are above the national average there. And very finally, that's just a very snapshot of our budget position at the moment, and that goes across schools as well as children's social care, and also our resources and business development. So and my budget accountant has put some nice bullet points at the end there just as a summary, but we're broadly balanced in terms of this year, in terms of our budget position at Q2. We do have some budget pressure in response to our looked after children rate, which has just grown slightly, but that's offset slightly by some savings achieved in our home to school transport area. But we are aware that we've got a potential COVID related pressure across areas such as bringing in agency social workers, etc. But it's right and proper that we've done that in order to ensure that we're still delivering the right services to children and families.
Right, Kathy, I presume you've finished. Must I say, it's an excellent report, and my goodness, I really do take my hat off to you and your social workers. I cannot imagine how tough it must have been over the last few months. So I think the committee, I hope the rest of the committee would agree with me in extending our congratulations on what you have done and what you are doing, which is obviously so important. That's why we sit on Children's Services Committee, because we care very much about children. So thank you for that. Steve, did you want to add anything to it, please?
No, Kathy's done a brilliant job.
In which case, do any members of the committee have questions, please, or comments? Oh, silence was the stern side.
Councillor Fuller.
But
You got Councillor Fuller.
oh, sorry,
Councillor
Councillor Fuller, followed after Councillor Fuller, Councillor Love. Thank you.
Yes, I'd really like to say a big well done to Hampshire for the school attendance rates. I think that is so important for a child's education to actually be breaking through the glass ceiling, really, because I know a few years ago our school attendance rates were miserable, fairly miserable in comparison. So thank you for all the work that you've done. I think there's been some really positive outcomes there, and I think that a big thank you to Steve, Hampshire, and Kathy and the team for that, because I think it is a testament to what a good job you're doing. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We'll take the credit, but I want us to I'm going to stop you from thanking Hampshire. It's Isle of Wight teachers, Isle of Wight social workers, Isle of Wight improvement officers have got us into this place. So when I'm in this meeting, I'm the director of children's services for the Isle of Wight, and it's a combined effort on the island. But I appreciate the sentiment, but it's an island effort, and it is really good though. And because the significance of the school attendance in this, in a safeguarding context is really important. And the SAGE published a report in mid-November about the harm that came from non-school attendance during COVID. And it's really quite significant, the impact on children's mental health in terms of their physical and emotional well-being. And the best, and I know it's controversial, I know it's nothing is risk-free in life, but getting children back into school is the best thing we can do for them. And it means that also from a safeguarding perspective, we've got extra eyes on those children, and we know that teachers will refer anything in to us that we need to look at. It just means that children are safer and they're better cared for that way. So it's a real achievement, but it's a shared achievement.
Thank you, Steve, and I acknowledge your acknowledgement of the hard work done on the Isle of Wight. However, it all stems from the top, and Hampshire have been there to support and encourage, and where we've had gaps, you've filled them. But I also know that we've taught you a thing or two. So good relationships like that are worth their weight in gold. I know that Councillor Brading has joined us, so he has heard all that. He can pass it on to all our schools. Councillor Love, you have a comment or a question? Thank you.
A question really. Thank you again for the report, Kathy. I very much appreciate that. I think it's important there, a couple of things that were mentioned, that you highlighted the budget pressures in Q3, and so for me that's a flag which needs to be taken up the line fairly quickly, given the fact that we are receiving additional funds from government and so on. That really needs to be pressed forward so that you don't have that pressure on your back now, or that concern about budgetary pressures in 3. So having highlighted it now, I think that that's important, that that's taken back to the cabinet for them to look at closely and to try and alleviate that pressure sooner rather than later. That's really important with the additional pressures that you've already had.
Can I just come in on that? So that's you're right. It's accepted. It's already done. We sat down earlier this year and we drew several lines on graph paper, as it were. One is that if we did nothing, this is what would continue to happen in terms of the growth in children looked after. If we made an intervention, and we're talking about our transformation programme, you get a different line, and we've got some evidence around that from Hampshire. So that's helped us in terms of getting an investment in additional social workers to make a big difference going forward. The googly that we've been thrown, if you like, is COVID, and what that changes things a bit, but also that's we're well positioned for that, and it's known within the Treasurer knows the effect that COVID has had on our numbers. It's slightly too early to say yet whether that's really, we just don't really know the long-term projection around that, and we've got to see. There's some evidence. I refer back to Hampshire in this example because Hampshire's a bigger place, and you just see the patterns emerge a little bit more quickly. And there's some evidence from Hampshire that there was a bulge, and that's beginning to work through the system, and things are going, you know, in a better direction in terms of numbers of children looked after. So hopefully that will happen here. But we hear those comments. You're right, and I don't know whether Paul might want to come in, but I'm sure that, well, I know that Treasurer, Cabinet have got eyes on this already.
Do you wish to come in, Councillor Brady?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, when you look at the Q2 financial position, it's fair to say that, ironically, Children's Services budget is actually in a much better position than it normally is this time of the year. You know, our budget is really almost coming in on track. We've had extra funding for COVID. It's difficult, but I can promise Councillor Love that no one fights harder for the Children's Services budget within the Cabinet than I do. You know, as you would expect. And I'm really pleased with the way our budget's going in these very difficult times, with all the extra pressures that the team have been under. You know, we are more or less running on track. And you know, next year, preparing for the budget for next year hasn't been as onerous task as it could have been. So yes, you know, budget's always tight, but you know, I'm going to promise Councillor Love that I'll be fighting for the Children's Services budget as hard as ever this year.
Thank you. Now, are there any other comments, questions, or can we move on to agenda item 7? Right, in which case, Mr. Thistlewood, if you note the report and the comments, and we'll now move on to agenda item 7, which is the work plan, and we're talking about March next year, of course.
There's no comments, we'll take it as
Obviously, what is listed is there. I think we've talked about possibly doing something about bullying in between times, to have either a meeting, something where, as Councillor Cameron mentioned, we perhaps arrange a small task force. I think,
or add it to the work plan.
You know, or just add it to the work plan, but definitely I think we need to do something about that. Councillor Cameron, you want to say something?
Thank you, Chairman. Just yeah, lastly, I must reiterate, it's very important to have a full anti-bullying conference. It must involve all the agencies and all the children, all the schools. It's very important because it's very effective. What I would like to see, I've not had sight of it lately, but is the young carers strategy and their action plan. If we could just have sight of that, please.
Right, Mr. Thistlewood has made an appropriate thing on that, so we will keep that in mind. Now, one point that has come up in the last couple of weeks, Councillor Love, this was something you arranged. We are arranging a meeting over the next couple of weeks to discuss school transport. If I could just leave it at that for the moment, but Mr. Thistlewood and I have drawn up a paper with possible suggestions, and I understand, Steve, you're quite amenable that we arrange a meeting. So, Councillor Love, just to put your mind at rest, it is your queries are being dealt with.
Thank you, Chair. It's not so much about the transport particular issue, it's about the school escorts. That's the issue that we think that we need to address very specifically. So thank you for that, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and
you're muted, Chair.
The only reason I said school transport is because the escorts come under school transport. So I was just trying to keep it pretty mild, if you like. Yeah. Did you want to add anything, Steve?
Only to say, completely get the point. I think a briefing would be a better setting, because also the numbers are so low that I think there's a risk that we go into personal circumstances, and we couldn't do that in a public meeting. I think is part of the other dimensions of that.
No, that's fine. I think therefore that is, unless anybody else has anything in particular importance to raise, I think we can close the meeting.
Well, you got members' question time.
Sorry, I do apologise. I've been corrected. Members' question time. Are there any questions from members, please? No, none have been submitted in advance, and none of the committee have raised hands. So in which case, I think we can close the meeting. Thank you to everybody for attending and for the excellent reports. And we'll just keep soldiering on and hope that we come out of this. There's no doubt about it. We've learned an awful lot, but then out of adversity come good ideas. So see everybody after Christmas. Please have a happy Christmas, Merry Christmas, and look forward to seeing everybody in the new year. And thank you for attending. I will now close the meeting at 18:35. Thank you.
Merry Christmas.